Hello everyone. In today's video, we're going to look at some questions which appeared in the recent August SAT test. Now, some of these questions we had discussed in our boot camp, and very similar questions to those appeared in the test. So I have three examples here. Okay? These were the questions which were reported by my students. So today we'll talk about them. We'll learn different techniques and strategies and different ways to solve those questions. Okay, so let's get started. Let's look at the first question. The first question says, number of hard math module 2 questions released by the College Board, they increased by, so this is your keyword, 8% from 2024 to 2025. So that's the first piece of information we have. Now, the moment we read that information, convert that into a multiplication factor. Okay, as you know, the percentage change problems always needs to be converted as a multiplication factor. So the multiplication factor for this change would be 1 plus, because we are increasing. If it wasn't decreased, we'll subtract. So plus, and convert that percentage 8% into a decimal value. So the decimal value corresponding to 8% will be 0.08. So that gives you the multiplication factor for the change is 1.08. That's the first piece of information we have. Let's continue reading the problem. And then it again increases by 12%. So this is the second piece of information. So first there was 8% increase. Now again, there is 12% increase. So one more time, let's calculate the multiplication factor for that 12% increase. Yet one more time. So multiplication factor for this change would be, it's always 1 plus, because it's again increase, and convert 12% into its corresponding decimal value. 12% is, you just divide by 100, so it's going to be 0.12. So the multiplication factor for the change will be 1.12. So 2% changes, both of them going to have their own corresponding multiplication factors. And the question is asking you, what's the total percentage increase? What's the percentage increase from 2024 to 2026? So it's asking us to combine both of those percentage changes. And the way we combine both the changes is by multiplying those multiplication factors. So the first change was 1.08. Then the second change was 1.12. So if you multiply that, you will get the total change. So that's your total change. Now multiply those two numbers. You can use decimals or you can use just your physical calculator, which is just faster. So 1.08 times 1.12, that's going to give you 1.2096. And 1.2096, the number after the decimal is your percentage increase. So that's your 20.96. So option D is the correct answer for this question. Now, one more aspect you need to pay attention is, and like many students make that change, is they add the percent. Like they will solve the problem as if initially there was 8% increase. And then after that, there was additional 12% increase. So they would add 8 and 12, that gives a 20% increase. But that's wrong. Remember, percentages can never be added or subtracted. Because anytime you make a percentage change, the value changes. And the next percent is applicable on the next, like the newer value. That's why please remember that do not add and subtract the percentage change. Just find the multiplication factor for each of them and then multiply. Okay, so that's how you solve the first problem. Then let's look at the next problem. Now this question says, the figure shows a cross section of two spheres, X and Y. So we have two spheres. Uh, uh, it shows a cross section. So cross section of the sphere looks like a circle. So we have two circles, X and Y, which are tangent to each other. Tangent means they're touching. They're touching at point R. The point Q, R, and S, they're on that line, which passes through the center of the sphere. So this is the center here. Now that information is very crucial. This is like your keyword, because the line passing through the center is going to become a tangent or the radius. That's why that information is very crucial. Then the question gives you the volume information. The volume of the sphere X is 36 pi. So the volume of this one is 36 pi cubic units. And the radius of Y is 8 times. So we know the radius of sphere Y is 8 times the radius of X. Using that information, question is asking us, what's the length of QS, this entire QS? Okay. So let's begin the problem. So you will begin by looking at that volume given. The volume given to you is 36 pi, and we know the formula for volume. The volume of the sphere is 4/3 pi r cube. That's a formula for volume. And this formula is also available to you in your formula sheet. So just in case you forget, you can look at the reference sheet. And that equals 36 pi. Solve for R there. Now you can use Desmos to solve for R. You can use the regression or the tilde technique to solve for R. Or you can just do it manually, cancel pi's both sides. 4 goes into 36 9 times. So R cube is 27. So your R is 3. You can just do it by hand or you can just use calculator. Okay. So your R, or the radius of the first sphere, is 3. That means this is 3. Then this is also 3. So your diameter is 6 for the first one. So that's the information we have for the first one. Now for the second sphere Y, the question tells us that the radius of the sphere Y is 8 times. That means the radius of the sphere X was 3. So the radius of the second sphere was 8 times that, which is 24. But remember, 24 is only the radius. So only this part is 24. Then this part is also 24 because your diameter will become 48 now. And then you can answer the final question. Final question says, what's the length QS? So QS is this total length. As total length becomes, so this is 6 and this is 48. So you do 6 plus 48. Again, you can use Desmos, calculator, but don't make any algebra mistakes, okay? So that's going to be 54. So 54 is your final answer. Next, let's move on to the third question. Now, this question deals with your margin of error concept. So let's read the question first and then understand what it means. So the question says, a researcher asked 1,450 randomly selected individuals from a city where they agreed with the claim that LeBron James is a better basketball player than Michael Jordan. Okay, so they are making a claim. So you have a sample of 1,440 random individuals, okay, and they agree that LeBron James, LeBron is a better player than Michael Jordan. Okay. Out of those, 89% agree with that claim. Okay, so 89% of the people, they are in favor of that claim with the associated margin of error of 2.4%. So 89% plus or minus 2.4%, that's kind of the range. Okay. Then the researchers surveyed another sample, the second random sample in the same city, but this time the sample was twice as large as the first one. So bigger sample. So the previous sample was 1,440. Now you double that. So that's like 2,880, like double the sample. Okay. And they calculated the margin of error of that. Okay. Then the question is asking, which of the following could be margin of error for that particular second sample? Now this question looks a little bit tricky, but remember, SAT will never ask you to calculate the margin of error. That's not in the scope of the syllabus. The main idea you want to focus here is how margin of error relates to the sample size. And remember, as your sample size increases, your margin of error will decrease. That's the only concept you need. So if you read the entire problem, all you need to figure out is what's happening to your sample size. And it's getting twice. So the sample size is increasing. So if sample size is increasing, that means your margin of error will be smaller. So if the margin of error for the original sample, if it was 2.4%, then for the second sample, it will be something less than that. So less than 2.4%. Again, we cannot calculate the actual margin of error. We don't have enough information for that. It's also not in the scope of the SAT syllabus, right? So something less than 2.4. Just look at the options. So the only option which is less than 2.4% is option A, 1.7%. That's your answer. So these were a few examples, I want to show you. Again, they were not that difficult, once you understand the logic and the idea behind them. Once again, please practice, focus on the questions, and look at the ideas. That will help you solve the problems better. If you need any additional help, okay, please reach out to me. I have my information, email ID and the phone number in the description. Anytime you need any help, in SAT preparations, any other boot camps, do reach out to me. And then thanks for watching this video. Thank you.